Hi Steve.
Hi.
Very nice to see you again and
Yeah.
to listen to another brilliant lecture
I've enjoyed it. It was really good.
at the Pro 2017 Spring
I
Conference.
know, another pro conference, yeah. I mean, they come around so fast, but you know, it's really great to see everybody here.
Sure is, sure is. Now, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in, this lecture I've done today, it's about the human origins, it's questioning about where does mankind come from, and there's a possible Bigfoot connection in there as well. So it's kind of an interesting lecture in two parts together, really. But I've lectured on ufology and I've lectured on the paranormal subjects, pretty much anything profound and unusual in the field. Been doing this for 34 years now, and I find the whole world of anomalous phenomena absolutely fascinating. So when I get the option to come along, meet people, and lecture, I love it. I'm here.
You're there. I'm glad you are too. And can you tell me how you started in this?
I started in the subject with my father. I blame him. It's all his fault, you know. It's his book collection. I mean, whilst my friends were at school reading, you know, comic books and things, I was tucking into books like Eric von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods, Brad Steiger's, Inside a UFO and things like that. I had a fascination as a kid for reading those sort of things, and unfortunately, you know, after reading a couple of years with them, I exhausted the local library, all 15 books, which the library had, and completely exhausted them. Thank heavens the internet came out, you know, later on in life, because it's a huge resource centre. Of course, there's a few little things on there which it's not true, but at the end of the day, it is a great resource centre. So, and I'm still learning now. 34 years on in the field, and I'm still learning today.
And you really do go out in the field, don't you?
Oh yeah. Most of my
You're
work
not an
is
armchair
no.
investigator at
Absolutely not. No, I believe that if you want to investigate it, you've got to investigate it in the field, because your option is to be able to record and capture something, evidence, as it happens, and that's what it's all about.
Brilliant. What is your view on spirituality?
My view on spirituality? Well, if you'd asked me about that about 2.5 years ago, I probably would have gone and went, well, is there enough evidence to consider? However, as many people know, I've been involved in something called the Phenomena Project over the last couple of years, and some of the evidence regarding spiritual communication is just off the scale. Absolute evidence of consistent, replicatable phenomena taking place. It's been recorded, it's been secondly observed by other people in the field of the paranormal research, and it's remarkable. So my views and opinions have changed completely over the last couple of years regarding this. People can go through life without experiencing a single thing, and I will never blame them for being sceptical, because if you spent your whole life in this subject and not witnessed something which has convinced you that there's something physical in nature about this, then people are going to believe it doesn't exist. But let me just show people out there that this is a real phenomena, and it's extremely rare sometimes, and people can spend the whole life in this field and not experience it. You know, for me, I've been lucky. I have experienced it. The latter part, I mean, 34 years in the field, I spent 32 of it without it, you know, but for me, the last 2 years, absolute turning round point, an awakening, you could say.
So there's hope for everybody.
And there's absolutely hope for everybody. Stick with it, I'm sure. You know, it can happen, it can happen.
Yeah. So would you say you've got a spiritual perspective on life?
I have a spiritual perspective on life, absolutely, now, because it's opened up. When you ask questions, sometimes you delivered an answer prompts you to ask 10 more. Yeah. You'll know this as well as I do, that sometimes you don't always get the actual answers. Sometimes it gives you clues. Sometimes you've got to work it out. Sometimes you've got to follow the clues. Sometimes we get little bits of information which is interesting and teasing. You know, maybe are we supposed to have all the answers? Maybe that's what life is. It's a mystery, it's a journey, and we've got to work it out, like a bit like a dot to dot, in a sense of speaking, making a bigger picture at the end of the day.
Good on you, Steve. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you. This evening, a little bit of a different lecture. The human origins mystery and the Bigfoot connection. Two subjects in one which deserve equal investigation and research just on themselves. And I'm going to tell you how I kind of came about the research into this field. And it all started for me back in 2009. the commemoration of the bicentenary of Charles Darwin. Now there's kind of three different theories as to where humans have come from. You've got the Darwinists, you've got the creationists, and you've got the interventionalists, and they've all kind of had a stab at where have we come from. And it's one of the biggest questions on Earth, which is still very much debated, and more so nowadays. And when you go to these sort of events, you see the regular thing that you see, if it's not pictures, it's usually some type of mannequins representing to man. And I remember being there in 2009, and I said to the curator at the building, is this the general theory? Are you still going with this? And he kind of looked over his shoulder and looked around and smiled at me and said, we can't really replace it until we've got something better to replace it with. And I thought that was a really interesting response, because it wasn't so matter of fact. And yet if you go back 10, 15 years ago, it was very much a matter of fact that we derived from something such as the apes. But that's coming into question more so nowadays. Now we're told right from the beginning that the solar system was basically a cloud of dust of swirling smoke, and it created kind of a disk, and the scenario could be accurate. However, gravity is not taught by academics. The driving force in which the solar system, or the universe for that matter, electromagnetic and electric forces clearly rule all cosmology. Now this is what we're pretty much taught in the books. And that Earth, roughly 4.5 to 3.5 billion years ago, was basically nothing much than just a ball of rock and lava, constantly under meteoric bombardment. And looking at something like this, you'd probably think, well, how on earth would life evolve on such a planet? At 2.5 billion years ago, during the second billion years, Earth would have had a cooling process from the lack of bombardment as it slows down. And in the masses of the land and the seas would condense steam venting from numerous volcanoes. By 2 billion years ago, this cooling would have been complete. Now this is what we're pretty much told in the history books. The academic road to life, this picture is supposed to represent organic molecules, that they do exist. However, in nature, they do spontaneously reassemble into even more complex molecules. Biological dogma insists the stroll down the magical yellow brick road of scientific imagination had to occur this way because cell components do exist and must be accounted for in a natural way, because it got to form in a natural process. The British astrophysicist Fred Hoyle once said, the likelihood, quote, the likelihood of organic molecules spontaneously assembling themselves into living organism is equal to the likelihood of a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and correctly assembling a Boeing 747. And he pretty much could put this down as proof that it's actually an improbability how life could have occurred according to the texts and the science books that we read. We're taught that the first living organism, the life form, was a prokaryote. And you can see an image of one here. Now what's really interesting about prokaryotes is that they dominated planet Earth for a duration of time. And as time went on, the miracle of the prokaryotes, the first life on Earth should be quite small, biologically simple, exists only in one form, which it did, and appear when Earth was cooling enough for it to have survived. Wouldn't be able to survive in too much of a hostile situation. Prokaryotes defy all that. They first appear in the fossil record around 4 billion years ago, when Earth was nearly formed. Appear is the operative word, shall we say, they appear. Time references are very difficult when it comes to such things like this. They simply came out of nowhere. We don't know where the prokaryote came. The first living organism on the planet, science does not know where it came from. But as time went on, it appears that around about 2 billion years ago, there was something else, another living organism called the eukaryotes was created. Now, something very interesting started to happen. These are much larger, by the way, far more complex single-cell bacteria. Their DNA was contained in a nucleus, which is very common nowadays. They appear as suddenly as prokaryote scientists would have us believe that they arose when larger prokaryotes ate smaller ones. So let's just get this right. What they're saying is that for 2 billion years they lived harmoniously together, and then all of a sudden one day they became cannibalistic and one started eating the other. I mean, why should that suddenly happen after 2 billion years of existence? Is very, very questionable. Now Darwin, we know all what Darwin thinks. He says, well, we've kind of all, we've evolved from the apes, and that he believed there was enough evidence to support that. I've always said no, there isn't. I've always said it's very, very questionable. Of course, let us not rule out the fact that evolution does exist. We see microevolution in birds, and this is what he used as an example. He looked at the birds and the finches and all sorts of different birds, and he looked at the differences depending on where they lived. And it would seem that adaptation had taken place. Birds had grown different types of bills to deal with the different type of food content, be it insects, larger nuts, larger seeds to eat, and of course there were variation. He put this as proof that evolution does exist. Of course, this is one main part of the paperwork that he put forward to prove the existence of microevolution. And I do believe there is microevolution. Microevolution does exist. But what about macroevolution, the large forms of macroevolution that took place in a click of a fingers? Hence, macroevolution requires gradual transitions between Australopithecines, which we can see on the far left here, to early Homos in the middle, and of course modern man to the right. This is what we refer to as macroevolution. Massive amounts of change in a short period of time. Australopithecines to Homos. Australopithecines were upright walking apes. Early Homos were much more man-like. This massive redesigning of the skull, for an example, is very prominent. Interventionists believe that it illustrates genetic manipulation at the hands of, I don't know, beings maybe, from somewhere else. We have to question these things. How does massive variation take place? And it's not just massive variation. In some cases, it's completely redesigned. Because there's nothing in between. Where's the missing links? We're still looking for it. We find all these wonderful things out there when conducting these tests and archaeological research, but we're not finding the missing links that breaks the bulb. Hence, I must be the missing link. Darwinism, evolution for dummies. This is pretty much what the textbooks are saying. That we pretty much crawled out of the sea and became a mammal, like that. And we're supposed to accept this as actual gospel, actual fact. Long arms were longer than their legs. Interesting thing to remember, their arms were longer than their legs. And, like modern apes, all quadrupeds, walking upright, need arms longer than their legs to move comfortably. Because if you imagine, we've seen apes running and moving on the floor. We've seen gorillas walking around on all fours, which they do on most occasions. Very rarely do they actually walk upright. They can do so. But have you seen the length of their arms to maintain that drift of walk? They have to have long arms to maintain themselves comfortably. Otherwise, it would be terrible for them. If we look at the chimpanzee, the long-armed Massacean ape. Now, this chimpanzee it's lost all its hair due to a disease that it had. But what is interesting is that you can see almost every single muscle flex. They are hugely muscular. And in fact, they are up to around about 5 or 10 times stronger than a human being. Well, don't let them deceive you, chimpanzees. One of these gets in a ring with Mike Tyson, could tear his arms off. They are extremely robust. They are very strong, and even their bone density is significantly stronger than the humans. Let's just go back. We've evolved from the apes. We've got better. Look at the jaw bones. This is Gigantopithecus's jawbone here, as you can see. Huge, absolutely massive. And look at the Gigantopithecus skull compared to the human skull. Massive variations. So, of course, not only have we got bigger and better, but also in some cases we've got smaller and weaker. This is a representation of what Gigantopithecus probably would look like. Reconstruction. Yes, we have a fossil record for this animal. It did exist. It ranged maybe from 8 to 10 feet tall, walked upright, walked like a man, was covered in hair. By all intents and purposes, it was not human. But what's the nearest thing we've seen to something like that nowadays? We see a lot of the reports from Bigfoots, Yetis, Sasquatch, the abominable snowman, the palmer, the alma. You can go on and on and on and on. The list goes on forever. Nearest representation is a Gigantopithecus, which we do know existed. I mean, we look at the complete redesign of the throat, for an example. Let's just go back again, once again. We've evolved from the apes. Okay, so apes, for an example, can swallow and breathe at the same time. Wonderful feat. Now, we've probably all tried that now and again, haven't we? It's not a pleasant situation. We all start choking to death because we're not designed to. And why? It's because the human throat has been completely redesigned. Completely redesigned. It's not an evolutionary step from a chimpanzee's throat to a human throat. Completely redesigned. And it may have been completely redesigned to incorporate complex speech pattern that us humans are capable of doing. So 13 ways humans are not primates. Why aren't we coming from the apes? Why are we not ape-like? Human bones are much thinner and lighter, therefore break easier. Of course. It's very rare you'll actually see an ape or monkey with a broken arm or broken leg. The bone density is massively more than the humans. So there's one thing they've got better on us. Second thing, human muscle are 5 to 10 times weaker than the primates. They're 5 or 10 times stronger than us. Again, they're better. Human skin is not well adapted to direct sunlight. We burn very easily. In fact, we talk about planets in the Goldilocks, the Goldilocks situation, just not too hot, not too cold. That's what we are. We're humans, and we have to be in that Goldilocks area as well, because we don't survive well under extreme cold or extreme heat. Of course, it's not a massive problem for the apes and the monkeys of this world. Human body hair is mostly missing. Well, I've seen the odd really hairy guy, but most of the time, generally speaking for the human race, we're missing most of our body hair. What is also interesting is the fact that we don't have to really cut, apes don't cut their hair, they don't have to. Their hair, their nails stop at a certain length. We have to go for trims and haircuts on a regular basis, otherwise, we've all seen maybe images on the internet. I've not cut my hair in 10 years, I've never cut my nails in 30 years. What did it look like? We don't have apes with that problem. Again, something they're better at. Human skull and brains, not in the same ballpark whatsoever. We are completely massively different in brain capacity to apes. There's a big difference. Human locomotion, bipedal, obvious differences. Sometimes apes can run equally or faster than a human being on all fours. Hence, when a gorilla charges you, you don't run, because you will never outrun it. Human speech, throats are completely reconfigured, absolutely redesigned. Human speech, throats completely configured for that speech. Human sex, no sign of a typical ostrich breeding cycles. We don't. Apes tend to have breeding cycles like most other animals on the planet. We don't have that. It's when we get the time. Human chromosomes, very interesting point. Biggest point, human chromosomes, 46 from 48, reduced to 46. Why does a chimpanzee have 2 chromosomes more than us? Why do apes have 2 more chromosomes than us? Why have we lost 2 and got better? Human senses, limited hearing, yes, compared to the apes. Limited sight, extremely compared to apes. They can almost see in the dark. And the sense of smell, for an example, we're limited. All these things are showing limitations. Human feet, they're non-efficient. Apes walk on flat-footed. Why? You don't see them trip over very often. You know, we do fall over because what we are actually doing is walking and balancing on the 2 balls of our feet, just under the back, under the large toe and the heel. And we balance. You know, we see our children when they're born taking, what, a year or so to just gain their balance. Not for apes. They're up and away. They're flat-footed. They don't trip over, they don't fall over, their balance is better. Human genetic disorders, one of the real big thing. We have over 4,000 human genetic errors in the human body, against a handful found in a chimpanzee or an ape. Why is that? Why have we got so many human problems? Why have we got so many disorders, genetic disorders in the human body? Last time we saw that was in Dolly the sheep. Remember Dolly the sheep? Genetically created. Oh yes, she looked like a sheep. She acted like a sheep. But under the microscope, she had thousands and thousands of genetic errors. Why? Because she was made in a laboratory. And you have to start questioning the fact is why we've got so many genetic problems in the humans. Human evolution for dummies, we now have 5 or 6 million years of fossils with small brains, heavy brow ridges, wide flat noses, projecting snouts, and no chins. Suddenly, and unexplainably, replaced overnight, literally, because 200,000 years is literally overnight in comparison to time on Earth. It's nothing. It's like a week. All of a sudden, we're on the scene. 200,000 years ago, creatures showing the exact opposite traits than humans. Why should we have that? It's a snippet of time. Here's a comparison of the bone difference. As you can see, the difference on the bottom is here is a human bone and the same bone from an ape. Look at the bone density. They're stronger. They're faster. Their bodies are better. They have less genetic problems. They can see better than us. They can hear better than us. They can smell better than us. Their hair stops growing at certain lengths. The nail stops growing at certain lengths. They can walk better than us. They are bone structurally better than us. They've not got as many genetic problems as a human. And let's just go back to what the science says. We've evolved from the apes. Well, I tell you, what's happened is that if that is the case, then we have de-evolved from the apes. Because we've not got better. We've got worse. And that doesn't exist. Darwin doesn't have de-evolution, he has evolution. Of course, he had these wonderful ideas, but it was a theory, and it still remains a theory. Because who is arguing these points? Not many people want to argue these points. There has been a few in the Times that said, rubbish, it can't exist like that, it doesn't work like that. Why should it be significantly different just for humans? In fact, so much so that George Bush, when he was president, he actually believed so much that interventional theory should be taught in schools in America. He actually declared it. He said, well, you can lecture and teach your creationism and your Darwinism, but let's put it on the record for once, that let's also teach the children about interventionalists, about something that must have intervened and created humankind. Let's put that on the card. Let's put those cards on the table as well. Let's not just be ignorant of it. So, what about Bigfoot? And of course, other similar creatures. Well, apart from unknown hair samples, there's been scat samples, there's audible cries in the dark at night, which are unidentified to animal registers. There's been sightings, unusual odours. And the most significant evidence comes from the form of footprints. Now, there's a lot of dodgy things out there regarding footprints. People can fake footprints, yes. But, all you've got to do is get somebody who's got an ounce of sense to realise what the difference is between a wooden footprint, a fake footprint, and one which is real. The human foot It's known as the towing off stride. This is what we do, because when we're walking, we kind of just don't think about when we're walking, it's kind of an automated response, but we toe off, we press on our toes to drive our bodies forward using the heel and the toe area. The human foot is a marvel. It is an absolute marvel of physiological engineering. Unlike anything else on planet Earth, there's not a single ape anywhere in this world that's got feet like humans. And there's no what? There's no transition. There's not an ape been found in the fossil records that looks like it was changing its foot to the human foot. It's just bang. Completely redesigned foot. How very nice. However, compared to pre-human or feet of non-efficient and lax smoothing walking, in other words, they didn't show smooth walking. We've seen evidence in fossil records of upright walking Mesocene apes, but they were apes. They were not human. And yet when you look at the kids' books these days and the teachings, it shows Neanderthal man, looking like some of the guys that you might see in Manchester town centre. Yeah? They've just got long hair, you know, they've maybe got a bit of a big nose and a big chin and maybe a few big eyebrows. And that's what they're teaching kids. And in fact, they probably look more like gorillas. Because they don't want to teach people the truth, that the fact is that we are a massive divide between ape and human. They want us to think that Neanderthal man actually may have been the missing link. No, he wasn't. How the human foot functions? Well, human step lands hard on the heel, as we can see right down here on the bottom. And of course it transfers forwards momentum along the outer ridge, which we can see from the outside side of the foot, and then they sweep it around to the arch towards the toe. And this is pretty much how we walk. It's the same for all humans, no different. An amazing form of how genetics has somehow created a unique foot in us all. But apart from that, you've got ethnologists. Now these are guys that are professional in examining the compression lines in tracks. Now it's not just a matter of seeing a track in the floor, but they are compression lines, because just like your fingerprint, our footprints are completely unique, because we have something referred to as dermal ridges, and they are absolutely unique, just as the fingerprint that we have. Each and every person has a different one. Under the microscope on footprints, you can see dermal ridging, and they differ drastically. Now, the only way to get dermal ridging in certain prints is for lasers to be used, literally lasers, and it can take maybe up to a week just to imprint all the dermal ridges into an artificial print in the ground. It's not impossible, but it's ridiculous, the concept of it, especially when there are sometimes occasions where an animal has been seen and left over 1,900 tracks over a period of 48 hours. It's just ridiculous to think that's even feasible. Tiny little tracks. There's also compression lines. In other words, when we press down on the floor when we're walking, you will see, and you will see it on the beach, because when we're walking, you don't tend to see the full footprint, do you, on the sand? You see the back part of your foot, a little bit in the middle, and then the front. There's a piece missing. That's called the arched ridge. That's known as human. Now, apes walk flat-footed, so when they stood in the sand, you'd see a nice full print. What else do we see like that? Bigfoot prints. Exactly the same as ape prints. Not human, but ape, because they're flat-footed. So, why are hominids, such as Bigfoots, not regularly seen? And I believe it's all about elusiveness, because they are damn good at hiding. They've had thousands and thousands of years to practice this. I'll give you an example. The panda. We all know the panda, you know. It's easily spotted. It was first discovered in China in 1869. 1869. Pandas are vivid in colour. They are black and white and live in an environment of just green. They move extremely slowly, and they kind of eat only really one thing. So, after finding the first one in 1869, how long did it take for them to find the next one? 3 months? 6 months. In fact, was it a year? No. It took over 60 years. Just over 60 years to find the next panda. And why is that? Because we knew where it was. It's black and white, lives in a green environment, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. It only eats one type of thing and moves really slowly. We should have found these, dead simply. And why? It's because it lives in an environment which is absolutely ridiculous for man to try and get in. We are not conditioned for those deepest jungles. It's very hard for us to transition. And they are elusive. And that's why it took 60 years to find a panda, the next panda, after 1869. Yes, they are a rare animal. And they are extremely elusive. So let us not kid ourselves. How many people have seen a badger in this country? Can I just see a row of hands? Blimey, very good guys, very good. Okay. Most people in the country don't get a chance to see one. They know they exist, mostly of them living in the UK. Most people tend to see them on the side of roads, unfortunately. But nevertheless, how elusive are they? Extremely. Anybody seen a black fox? Not one hand. Do you know there are 60,000 of them in this country? There are 60,000 black foxes now in this country, as well as black squirrels in London. A dominant gene is taking over. We all seen black rabbits in Wales, because maybe somebody let one go, yeah, they bred like rabbits. But yeah, 60,000 black foxes in the UK. How elusive are they? Today it's still extremely rare to see a panda in natural habitat. Why? What makes them so elusive? Well, we know. It's what we can say is the human inefficiency. It's our inefficiency in primeval forest environments. We're just not good. So is it feasible to say a large animal of, say, Bigfoot nature could exist in places uninhabited by humans on Earth? Absolutely. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when we said coelacanths. Oh no, they disappeared along with the dinosaurs 60 odd million years ago, until we actually found one in the sea alive, and you know, they are out there still. So still trying to find out new things. However, how often does the information come forward? Bigfoot, Sasquatch. This one's carved from a tree. It gives you an example of what basically people are reporting, the size of them. Heavy ridges over the eyebrows is one of the main things. Of course, broad, flat noses, mouths jutting off the face, usually no chin, short, thick necks, extra long arms. That's the biggest giveaway. Extra long arms, just like apes. We ain't got extra long arms, we've got relatively short arms. We come from the short arms, the short ape arms that the apes had, apparently, according to Darwin. And they have a habit of what you refer to as the dragging hand process, where it's kind of licked back as they walk. We see this in a lot of apes. Put a covering of head to toe of hair on their bodies, of a pre-human, and what have you got? For instance, Gigantopithecus looks very, very similar to Bigfoot. We probably know the most significant video that's ever been shown on the subject of Bigfoot is the Patterson Gimlin film. It's the most recognisable frame from the famous Patterson film from 1967. We've probably all seen it at one stage or another. And it's been funny because if you've been tracking this footage and what appears to be analysis that's taken place on this over the years, it's been absolutely comical. Because at first it was said, oh, it's an absolute hoax. And then 8 years later, oh no, we found some evidence to support it's real. And then it was a hoax again. And then it was real again. And then a hoax, and then it was real. And in fact, a huge amount of research and analysis has recently taken place on this film, especially over the last 10 years. And it's remarkably showing that support evidence that it's actually real, that it's something not human, or it was actually filmed. I'm going to tell you the reasons why. It looks like this creature has breasts. Hence, they believe it to be a female. What is also interesting is that it alarmingly looks more like a gorilla than what the average stylistic representation of Bigfoots are. However, there's been numerous forms of research conducted which shows that, yes, it does seem to have the muscular capabilities or capacities, should we say, of that of a gorilla. You can see a picture here on the right-hand side of a gorilla and the Patterson footage on the left-hand side. Very muscular bodies. And now when the Patterson film came out, this is what the sort of thing was going around. Oh, you can buy one. Just buy a suit, stick a man in it, and walk a little bit funny, and you've got the footage. And of course that was pretty much believed back then, in the early 1970s, 71, and people kind of dismissed it. It was only years later when we started really looking closely at the footage that we really started asking questions. Could this have simply been just a gorilla suit? Really? For a start, analysis shows that there's muscular movement. It's not padding underneath the fur, it's muscular flexation. It's what happens when we see Olympic runners run or walk. We see the flexing, the divots, the ridges in the muscle movement as they move. That's extremely, extremely difficult to produce nowadays in suits. This was 1967. There's also the scale, as you can see there to the right, a gentleman walking, and the arm length is what I want to take into consideration here. In yellow, you can see the arm length of the gentleman walking. And comparison footage to scale, that is, to scale to the left-hand side, shows the arm length of this creature. Significantly longer than the human arm. Why is that? Because it's a trait that you find in apes, and it's not a trait you'd find in humans. So, although it is very difficult to find Bigfoot suits, we also know that it's probably even harder to find ones with an extra foot-long arm. What are you going to stick in it? Can you imagine if somebody had really gone to all this effort in 1967? Scaling as well, initially they said, oh, it's just the size of a man. No, it isn't. You can see the size of a man walking in exactly the same location where this footage was taken. And you can see the creature in the background. Scale comparison. You can clearly see the difference, that this creature represents something walking bipedal with flexing muscles, with breasts as well, and long arms, which is 7 foot tall. Considerably larger than a man. It's not the first piece of evidence to come out. There is also the Minnesota Iceman. Now this is really interesting because the second best proof of hominid reality is this creature. Shot through the mid-back. Note there was exit holes. There's one here, just in the middle of its chest, and one through the eye. Its corpse was frozen in a solid block of ice. And it apparently disappeared around about 1981, I think it was really, when it completely disappeared off the scope. But it was used on displays like fairs and circuses and things like that around America from 1968 to 1980. People saw it. And when you talk to these people, they'll say it was absolutely a creature. Absolutely sure for themselves that this was real and was not any form of trick. A very interesting story emerged regarding Albert Ostman, considered to be the third best evidence of hominid existence. The reality is that he provided a detailed account of being captured by what he can only explain as a Bigfoot family in 1921. And he was told by Swedish immigrant Albert Ostman. Now, he never saw any notoriety. No fame, no money, kept it to himself, and it was pretty much his story was kind of stumbled upon. And he'd actually even waited 40 years before even talking about it. And the story it's become quite well known. It's known to be, well, thought to be accurate. Now what's really interesting is when they interviewed this gentleman, he talked about certain traits that he identified and what these creatures did. And it was only years later that science kind of caught up and worked out that, yes, these animals would have probably had those traits. How did he know that 40 years prior? He shouldn't have done. And on top of that, he passed numerous lie detector tests and never wavered from his story, not in a single detail. And I think he passed about 9 lie detector tests. Of course, he's passed away now, but his story is still very prominent. Probably another well-known incident is the abominable snowman. Now this is taken from Eric Shipton. Eric Shipton's photo from 1951, crossing the Himalayas. These abominable snowman, Yeti tracks, it's also known as the Yeti. Yeti tracks were photographed, Himalayas, Eric Shipton, 1951. Skeptics, now this is really fun, because now you start to go back and look at what science said about them. Skeptics, they called them. Skeptics tried to explain them away by saying they were, in fact, bear tracks. Does that look like a bear track to you? Well, probably one of the biggest problems is trying to identify such a thing and confirming that it's a bear track is bears have 4 feet. And this is bear tracks. On the right hand side, notice 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because they walk on 4 legs. And they have really big claws as well. And they're usually quite prominent in tracks. Look at the tracks on the left hand side here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. This is a biped walking over the Himalayas. There is no creature living up there in the Himalayas. That's one big thing I will definitely argue the point on, because there is no food. If you want to track an animal and you track the food, you follow the food, you follow the source. Because no animal can sustain themselves on snow and ice. I'll tell you what they are doing now. The likelihood is that they're crossing from one valley to the other. And rather than having to go the way round, they cross over the peaks, the Himalayan mountains, from one valley, one source food to another source food on a seasonal pattern. The likelihood is that he probably did photograph strange tracks of a bipedal that cannot be explained. What makes me also laugh is the fact is that what bear is going to live on the Himalayas, the Himalayan mountains and the snow and ice? Very rarely do you see brown bears at that height. But even if you did, this is the Himalayas. And they certainly won't walk on 2 feet for the duration of time. Again, the Shipton footprint, you can count the toes and a bear print, and you can count the claws. Massive, massive difference. But you know what? That's down as fact. What he photographed was bear tracks. Really? Here's a plaster cast of the footprint. This one down here is an image of a gorilla print. Now, I assure you, there were no gorillas walking across the peaks of the Himalayas, the jungle animals. What was this creature? It's no bear track. Another interesting incident was known as the Bossberg Cripple. Now, these tracks were discovered in Bossberg in Washington during the winter of 1970. Apparently, the same creature visited the outskirts commonly several times, was spotted rummaging through bins and rubbish and things like that, trash cans. And during each visit, it left identical tracks in the snow and mud, which is interesting. Snow and mud. Their key feature was that the left foot had been broken and later healed. Now, anybody knows if you break a bone, especially a foot, and you do not put it in plaster, it will reshape itself. And this is what we found in the prints of this particular incident. These are the plaster casts from those prints, as you can see. And I have to say, what is remarkable is that it is the largest prints ever on record. 18 inches. That's 1.5 feet to you and me. 18-inch footprints. And they were left in hundreds all over the place. over a short period of time. To the left you can see the crippled foot and the unusual shape pattern. The foot has reformed itself after basically how a creature, through trying to survive, is walking on a damaged foot. It resets itself, and of course you can see this in the impressions. Specialists, professionals have looked at the prints and looked at the casts and worked out the positioning of bones to generate that image and generate those casts. And what they find is you can clearly see the difference here between the left and the foot, the left, right, and the right foot. Clearly the left foot is deformed in some way due to injury. Now what is interesting is this track on the right, because I want you to know straight away is the positioning of how far the ankle is. The ankle on these animals are a lot further forward than human ankles are. It's greater stability. Can you imagine, you know where our ankles are, the more near the back of our foot? If you push them forward an inch, we've got greater stability. Balance and all, remember? We've got greater stability. And what we've got here, it's clearly showing, this can't be human, unless it's got bones like a human has in the foot. Greater stability. We know they walk flat-footed, which shares the weight right down the foot, which means that they're unlikely of tripping up. They're better walkers. In fact, the bottom line is we've got crummy feet, guys. Whatever's designed our feet is not better than what they have. They have better stability, a better pacing of the foot. And we see this time and time again. Dermal ridges, patterning. We shouldn't get that on fake feet. People have made fake feet out of wood and plastic and things and gone walking around, think it's funny to make Bigfoot footprints. Yeah, it happens. But they don't have dermal ridges, they don't have compression lines. Compression lines means that there's bending in the foot as it moves. Now here's a typical Bigfoot stride. This is a 6 foot tall man, stretches to match the stride of a Bigfoot. The fake tracks, convincingly, a hoaxer would have to sink the prints to the depths that would indicate a body weight of 600 to 1,000 pound. 600 to 1,000 pound. Let's just figure that out then. This would mean your average guy, a 300 pound man, would have to at least carry a barbell of, say, another 300 and then walk. And not just walk normally, but walk with an exaggerated gait. In other words, extra big strides. So it's like me saying to any guy here, pick up another guy who is exactly the same weight as you and walk with an exaggerated gait and producing the tracks that this animal left. It's very, very hard to have done. Human vs Bigfoot prints. Well, Roger Patterson, his foot here is on the left against the print that was caught. Okay, it's 15 inches, in fact, 1967. These prints on the right, they look like Bigfoot prints. Look at the size. No, it isn't. They are, in fact, 30,000, sorry to be exact, 30,000 years ago, these were taken from a cave floor. These are Neanderthal tracks. Neanderthal tracks, Bigfoot tracks. We have variation. In fact, there's so many different tracks in comparison to the Patterson one. You can see the Patterson ones, you can see the variational ones here. But they're all pretty much similar. Now what happens when you don't wear shoes? This is what happens. Your feet change. In fact, your feet become wider, the bones become stronger, the toes become bigger, the gap between the toeing area becomes larger. This is from a guy who's never wore a pair of shoes in his life. Our feet do change naturally, but we are confining them into shoes. Under the normal process, this is how the human foot would look like without a shoe. It's interesting, isn't it? How it seems to lean more towards something that you consider unusual than a human foot. As I mentioned earlier, the image that you have here to the left is what is referred to as Neanderthal, which is ridiculous. And it more than likely would have looked something like the image on the right, more like a gorilla than it would on a man. But of course, science wants to try and explain this away, that the transition from ape to man is found in Neanderthal, and no, it isn't. So, a deliberate and misleading visual representation, yes. Question: if pre-humans, in other words, upright Mesocene walking apes, if pre-humans were hominids, in other words, if they were the Bigfoots, how could true humans evolve? According to Darwin theory, we couldn't. We couldn't have evolved from ape if Bigfoot exists. Might be a good reason why Bigfoot might never be found. You know? I mean, if somebody suddenly pops up one day and says, hey, I shot a Bigfoot, I've got it here. How long do you think it'll be there? How long do you think it'll be until he's not talking about it anymore? One crashing through a fence. This fence is, I believe, up to 10 feet height. It's barbed wire, split right through the middle. Split right through the middle. By something with force. I can't break a barbed wire fence, but these animals apparently do. And this is on farmland in America, where they claim to have seen these animals, given chase to them, because their sheep are going missing. Bigfoot hair samples are a big thing. I mean, you know, it never ceases to amaze me how people try and make money off. I've got a Bigfoot sample. It turns out to be a piece off the cat, off the dog, off a deer. You know, the regular things, even off themselves in some cases, but people will sell it. It's amazing. And this has been going on for a long, long, long time. But we are getting to places because we've made a big boo-boo, I think. Because when we have, over the years, analysed hair, it would seem that there's been human traits in it. Oh, it's human. Well, how do you know it's human? Because it's got some human DNA in it. Therefore, it's human. But if these animals are very closely genetically tied with humans, then we can expect to have some form of human DNA within its pattern sequence. So we have to kind of think, well, really, should we have thrown all those out just because there was some traits of human DNA in there? That might actually be to represent that, yes, it is closely associated to humans, but not necessarily will be. One of the biggest tricks is using special tape, which is very, very sticky, and you place it around given areas where apparently Bigfoots have been seen, some of them at heights up to 12 feet, 9, 7, 8 feet, and hopefully waiting for an animal to cross its path. There isn't many animals coming in at 9 feet tall, which are going to leave hair samples, but occasionally they are captured. And what is interesting is that could Bigfoot's DNA be similar to humans? It would seem so, because apparently there was trace enough in some of these hairs to say it isn't human, but not enough to identify it as an unknown source creature. There was some elements of human DNA in there. So how does it happen? Well, it must have only been a hoax, because there's nothing else that's going to walk past with a small mitochondrial amount of DNA from a human that's going to spread it across a tree at 9 feet in height. So what could have happened? Well, there's a good chance that these creatures may have existed or still do exist. And humans, as we are pack animals, and threats in our society we would have cleared out. We find this in Africa now. Tribes that live in Africa, you don't get lions going by, you don't get cheetahs going by and things like that, because they clear them out. They're pack hunters, humans. And we don't like threats in our neighbourhood. So the good and likely point is that anything, even if it was bigger than us, we would have tracked it, we would have made sure it moved away. And where are these said to live? Probably the regions of Earth where humans don't exist, don't live. The tops of mountains, the deepest of jungles, the quietest places on earth. Is that by chance? Or they've just got common sense to stay away from us? I believe that the possibility is a genetic thing of adaptation, in that we've driven these animals to the furthest regions of the planet, and that they know to live there through generations of learning how to survive on planet Earth alongside humans. The number one things at the top: stay out of our way. And that's pretty much what I think is taking place here. We know that it's not something which is relatively new. The Native Americans taught of Sasquatch, even did drawings with them, communications with them. They believed to live with them harmoniously, spirit-natured. There are lots of references about these creatures around the world. It's not just America, but all over the world. One of the earliest reports of a Bigfoot was in fact 1774. Pacific Coast, Captain Bruno. And he described something as having a huge monstrous body, which terrorized the tribes of these people. Had very long hair, black, covered in hair. The creature's skull, though, which is interesting, is the creature's skull was similar to humans in shape, but much, much larger. Similar to humans in shape. Its arms, again, here we go. This is from 1774. Its arms were long, which is not a human trait. And it was known to emit a terrible scream. Interesting, because screams have been recorded in locations where Bigfoots are said to exist. Science says, why the variation? You know, you've got all these animals exist. Why do they always why are they all different looking? You know, they all look different. And we're supposed to accept that there is no variation. Why should there not be any variation? We have variation. Yeah. We've got to look at ourselves. We have massive variation in humans. We're all human. Be us black, white, Chinese, American, whatever. We are all human. We have massive variation. Just because it's got variation does not mean it doesn't exist. And what they're saying is, too much variation in Bigfoot sightings suggests otherwise that it doesn't exist. Absolute rubbish. So where exactly did we come from? This is the biggest question. Where did we come from? If we haven't come from the apes, is this one of the biggest questions that is overlooked in life? Asking the questions as to where we come from. Maybe the interventional theory represents that we have had some form of intelligent visitation that's managed to put humans on the block, the new kids on the block, because it would seem that Mesocene apes, just like apes now, still live normally. We're not seeing much massive variations in them. What's interesting is how did the genetics work? Genetic manipulation was the theory. We can cause now genetic manipulation ourselves. In fact, we can use certain chemicals to actually splice and cut parts of DNA. It's a scary process. It's a scary time. Science is quite incredible what we can do. And I assure you that we have, even if we don't know about it, come very far from Dolly the sheep. But what is really interesting is when we start looking at the three primitives and the human, because there are kind of three different types here that I've tested, and it shows massive variation. But one of the biggest things is why do humans only have 46 chromosomes to 48? Why have we lost two? Further tests were carried out, and in humans, the second and third, this is a human genome project, the second and third chromosomes in humans, not found in anything else on this planet. Second and third chromosomes of all the other primates have been carefully and deliberately fused. They've been fused. Something in humans is being fused, and it's not found in anything else. The fusing process is like a chemical reaction to DNA alteration. It's like something is left a print to say we were created somehow. It's not a natural process to have these chromosomes fused, because we realised, hang on a second, we've not got 46. We've been telling them that years we've got 46 and apes have got 48. No. 2 of our chromosomes are fused. A pair of our chromosomes are fused. And we don't know how that happens. So we do have 48, or we did have 48, and something came along and caused massive alteration to fuse 2 of these chromosomes to make the human. Now that fusing is not a natural process. It's scary. Like I said, scientist team creates GM human embryo. These are the things we do know. You know, imagine what we don't know. Neanderthal DNA split from humans. This is interesting because it's showing evidence that DNA within Neanderthal will show that it was on a separate path. In fact, there were different versions of humans many years ago, or should we say pre-humans. There were different versions. Why should we have all different versions? That's a questionable theory. How did a human come to be? That's even a bigger one. Does governments take it seriously? Well, let's have a look. On September the 2nd, 2011, an article appeared online in the usnews.com. The article displayed the memo to the left, dated 1959, regarding the manner that the US State Department instructed the US Embassy in Kathmandu in regards, quote, the biped. Maybe they didn't have a name for it then. 1959. What are we going to do about the problem? How are we going to address it? Again, another one left. This is a Maryland Sheriff's report from the US discussing an incident from the year 2000. The deputy does make an observation of, quote, creature he cannot identify, close quote. Official documented reports. During the 1960s, there was a rash of Bigfoot sightings in the region of northern California. The sightings were near Oroville Reservoir, which is interesting because all animals have to drink, and Butte County area. Mr. Jackson saw, quote, a large ape-like creature emerged from an old outhouse and ran up the hill, close quote. This report was written a member of the National Park Service from the Olympic National Park. It's in Anderson Meadow in Washington, in the US, outlining a Bigfoot sighting with some good detail. The report was written in 1993. It's a very prominent report. A lot of people know of this, or certainly cryptozoologists know of this report. Very prominent report. A lot of information. So, time to ask the questions. What causes mankind to have a difference in the genome? How did we come to be? Why are we massively different than apes? Science says we've evolved from the apes. We've evolved, we've got better, evolution. In fact, I would always argue the point that they are a lot better than us. They're adapted to this world. It would seem that we're not. We have genetic errors. Why have we got over 4,000 genetic errors? Last time we saw something like that was in Dolly the sheep. It's also interesting to note that the massive variation in humans and even in the sizing of humans. And there is some fossil record evidence of this. The likelihood is, though, 9 times out of 10, the Smithsonian Institute gets hold of it and, unfortunately, it disappears from the light of day. But they do exist. They're listed in biblical times. The information's there. It's in scriptures, it's in scrolls. You know, when they say Goliath, he was not a small guy. Some of these apparently are said to be up to 36 feet in length. Now, don't get me wrong, when you go onto the internet and type in giant skeletons and stuff, most of them are all rubbish, fake photos. You know, these sort of things are just ridiculous. But let's get straight that there are some photographs that are thought to be authentic. But they disappear because it is forbidden archaeology, unknown archaeology. A very famous world leading person in the field of archaeology, went public just to argue the point of how long humans have really been around. Because they say that the fossil record says that we've only been around for a short span of time. That's not actually quite true. It would seem that we've been around a lot longer. And of course it's problematic when she dug up a bone one day belonging to a relative of the dinosaurs and looked close and found a flint arrowhead in one of the bones, which shouldn't have existed, because what was creating a flint arrowhead back then? And she did go public with it. And what she got for her troubles, she's now a florist. She's not accepted in the field of archaeology anymore. She had to leave the work, ridiculed, and she had to completely change profession. So it's pretty much learned in the field of archaeology that there's a no-go area. And if you find such things, you sweep them under the rug. Do such things of mystery, these giant bones exist? Well, yeah, there's records, there's information around about them. There's hundreds of them. Giant skeletons found, Smithsonian Institute involved, da-da-da-da-da. They're plentiful. I go, look, here's another. Smithsonian gets huge Indian skull. Have you ever seen it? Have we ever seen it? Has it been on television? Has it been in the news? There is plenty of evidence to support. Yeah. And of course, these references go on around the world in regarding giants and the discovery of them. This is said to be a fossilized footprint. Michael Tellinger, in front of a stone fossilized footprint in 2012. How big is that print? 5 foot long? Could it really be a print? But it's there. You can visit the location. It looks like a footprint. It looks like a fossilized print. But feasibly, come on, 5 foot big, 5 foot, how can it be? Massive fossilized footprints again, found. Look at the size of this print. Huge compared to even some of the Bigfoot ones. And yet it's thousands of years old. What creature was that? So why not tell us the truth? Because it's a massive problem, that, isn't it? They tell us the truth. According to the Bible, we came from Adam and Eve, remember? That just throws the fossil record straight out the window. So you can see how creationism and creationists are losing the argument now because of science. Because, I'll tell you, because if Bigfoot exists, the evidence may prove that humans do not originate from apes. It's as simple as that. How can a Bigfoot exist? It wouldn't work in with the fossil record that we're told. And if there's living evidence ever found of one, that's real bigger question is not can a Bigfoot exist, but what's the implications to the Darwinian theory? The implications that we've evolved from apes. The implications from the falsified fossil records of how long we've been around. So, be it real creatures or metaphysical in nature, because it's also argued the point that some of these creatures might even be metaphysical. There's even people who have reported it, seen these things, believe it or not, in the UK. Now, I don't really believe that an animal of this stature could live in the UK, not with the food source it would require and the very small landmass that we have. I think you only have to drive 53 miles in each direction. But people do see these things, people do report these things. And I've met 2 people in my life who've told me about seeing things in the area of Cannock Chase, Staffordshire. Absolutely 100% sincere. These things are real, I believe. If they're physical in nature, I don't know, but they seem to leave physical evidence behind. The evidence suggests they might just exist. Thank you.